Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. Today I want to talk about Molloy by Samuel Beckett, which is the first book in his famous trilogy from the earlier portion of his career. I read this for a class and I was very lucky to do so. I think a lot would have gone over my head without it. I think a lot went over my head anyways. It was enjoyable at times, it was slow going at times, it was funny at times, it was exhausting at times. So it was a lot, but it's clearly a very important piece of literature and the things it's trying to do are really interesting. So I want to sort of talk a little bit about just the basic parts of the novel, what is going on or what I think is going on, and then talk a little bit about how I was sort of directed to read this by my professor, who's actually a Samuel Beckett scholar and who provided a lot of insight to help me appreciate this more than I think I would have if I hadn't been taking the course. So like I said, this is the first of a 3-book trilogy. Malloy, the last one's The Unnameable, and the middle is Malone Dies. I don't think I'm going to get to the second and third anytime soon, but I know I'll have to at some point. This book starts off, let me just read the very beginning sentences because I don't even know how to describe what it is. It's this guy in his room. I'll read it. I am in my mother's room. It's I who live there now. I don't know how I got there. Perhaps in an ambulance, certainly a vehicle of some kind. I was helped. I'd never have got there alone. There's this man who comes every week. Perhaps I got here thanks to him. He says not. He gives me money and takes away the pages. So many pages, so much money. So all we kind of get is that this guy has no idea where he is. He might be at his mother's house. Somebody who he doesn't know comes by. He's in a bed, and it seems as though he is writing, and he's getting paid to do so. Very, very vague description, but at least there's something there that we can kind of think about. Then we get this pivot into one of the most interesting parts of the book, and the part that sort of echoes throughout the rest of the novel, which is this scene where Malloy, that's the narrator of this first section. It's a 2-section novel. Malloy is up high on this cliff, and he's hiding behind a rock, and he's looking down, and he's seeing 2 people who he calls A and C, and he describes them in detail, which is very important because these characters come back again, but not identifiably by name. It's more so, there are certain descriptions, a certain coat. One of them is carrying a stick. Things that sort of hint towards either the same person reappearing or doubles appearing, which is also something that I'll get into. But anyway, Malloy is on this cliff. He's looking down, and A is walking towards him, and C is walking away from him. And the way he describes them is really interesting. To say they knew each other, no, nothing warrants it. But perhaps at the sound of their steps, or warned by some obscure instinct, they raised their heads and observed each other for a good 15 paces before they stopped, breast to breast. Yes, they did not pass each other by, but halted, face to face, as in the country of an evening on a deserted road, 2 wayfaring strangers will, without there being anything extraordinary about it. But they knew each other, perhaps. And that's what's interesting, is quickly you realize that Malloy loves to contradict himself. Well, did they know each other? Probably not. Nothing warrants it. Maybe they did. Nope, they're actually strangers. And he just kind of does these things. Similar to what I was talking about with the Conrad. He does that kind of stuff, but it's much more extreme and it's a little more ridiculous. Here's another line I really liked. A little dog followed him. A Pomeranian, I think. But I don't think so. I wasn't sure at the time, and I'm still not sure, though I've hardly thought about it. It's ridiculous. And then I think he goes on later, like in the middle of an entirely different narrative, he says something like, yes, it was a Pomeranian. The less I think about it, the more certain I am. I think that's the quote. And these are hilarious. And the thing about the way he describes these scenes is you never quite know where you are. And this is just the first of many drastic pivots. And it's almost as if you exist in between the lines. I don't think I've ever been more close to a book, if that makes sense. Like, I've never had to pay such close attention. It really tested me, which I think is a good thing. But it's definitely hard work, and reading, 4 pages feels like 40 pages. Like, it really is. You have to pay such close attention because you never do know where you are, but you'll have even less of an idea if you miss a couple lines. And the difference between that is huge. And so then he goes on to say, and this is all in the first 8 or so pages, I promise I'm not reading the whole book, but he goes on to say, I am perhaps confusing several different occasions and different times. Deep down, and deep down is my dwelling. Oh, not deepest down, somewhere between the mud and the scum. And perhaps it was A one day at one place, then C at another, then third at the rock, and I, and so on for the other components, the cows, the sky, the sea, the mountains. I can't believe it. No, I will not lie. I can easily conceive it. What? So the whole thing, you've just read 10 pages, and like I said, the 10 pages feel like 100 pages, and it's interesting, and it's funny. It's kind of tough sledding, but it is super interesting. And then, of course, you get to this point, and he's like, well, maybe every single element came from a different day and a different perception. I've just combined them all into one. And so it's things like that that sort of happen throughout that first state. And what, I won't get too deep into this because I don't even completely understand it myself. I need to understand it because I have a test in a few days. But we read for this course, which is called The Backgrounds to Modernism, we read Descartes, A Discourse on Method. And we've talked a lot about this Cartesian subject-object relationship and sort of the foundations of the novel being built on the idea that of the subject-object relationship. Here I am, and everything around me I am perceiving. The I think, therefore I am. And so what Beckett seems to be doing is completely deconstructing that. And by deconstructing that, he's deconstructing the novel, in a sense. One of the things we talked about was Thomas Hardy, and how all of his novels start where you're viewing something from a mountain and you're looking down on these people walking across this road, and then you zoom in to these people and then you meet them and you learn them, and the rest of the novel takes place like that. But it's like, how am I viewing these people from all the way up above if it's not a narrator, if it's not a... So he's trying to find some sort of truth, I think, in the way he's writing. Some sort of truth about how we perceive things and how confused and muddled our lives really are, and sort of fight against the lack of clarity or the excess of clarity that literature provides, and then to say, this is actually how it is. So there's a couple things going on, right? That, the way I just described that, is what I think sort of like Conrad does really well. Beckett pushes it so far that, again, it becomes a little ridiculous, but you can see how intentional it is when we get to the second chapter, and we have a very traditional narrator, Moran, who is sent on this quest to find Molloy. And the way that it's written, I think there's maybe 2 paragraphs in the full, 85 pages of the first section on Molloy. And then all of a sudden we get the more traditional paragraph breaks. It's more minimalist, it's concise, it's descriptive when we get to Moran. And like I said, Moran is sort of on a quest for Molloy. And what ends up happening is there's a sort of jumbling up. This is not a spoiler. I won't exactly say what happens when it gets to the end, but I do need to touch on it a little bit because it is, just in order to talk about the book. There is a jumbling up of people. Who is Molloy? Who is Moran? Who's A? Who's C? Beckett seems to really want to confront, to put people in a crisis of identity, to put his characters in an identity crisis, and to separate themselves from, like I said, the traditional sort of Cartesian notions. But imagine being encountered with your double, for example. Imagine questioning if you are really you, if you exist, he's super interested in these questions. And like I said, he is very funny. The prose is gorgeous, and the lines might not relate to each other all the time, but they are beautiful standalone. And what happens in the second part of the novel, in the Moran part, is that you sort of shift from that traditional storytelling into the weirdness. It never gets quite as weird. I don't know. It's bordering on it as the first section, but you're shifting into that, and objects start appearing from the first section. The wooden stick, bicycles. It almost becomes a demonstration of that first part where Malloy is saying, oh, maybe I've combined all these things. Maybe I've taken this element from here and this element from here and put them all into one place. Another thing that's really interesting in the second part, and maybe the one kind of thing where I feel like it's almost doing something that a normal novel might, normal novel, I say that very loosely, but like realist prose might, is Moran is a father, and he's an awful one. He's almost like a sort of tyrant, and his inability to understand his son's want to basically desert him at, like, I think he's young, like 15 or something. Like, it's very clear that Beckett at least takes something from, I think, the parenting style that he experienced, a parenting style that was probably very traditional in the early 1900s, and very much lashes out against that. So that is one interesting thing that's working. And I really don't want to spoil anything else, but what I will say, the end of the second section seems to be trying to target some sort of infinite loop. And that is, again, tying back into that, was A here, was C here, what was the clouds like this that day. It becomes one giant thing that you could almost read over and over and over again, and it would never end. Which is interesting, because there's still 2 more books. So I would be interested. If you've read the trilogy, let me know how that sort of shaped out. You think that still plays in. But we did talk about the last paragraph of The Unnamable, which is the 3rd book, which sort of goes on, I can't go on, you must go on, I'll go on, you must say words as long as there are any, until they find me, until they say me, strange pain, strange sin, you must go on, perhaps it's done already, perhaps they have said me already, perhaps they have carried me to the threshold of my story, perhaps the door that opens on my story, that would surprise me if it opens, it will be it will be the silence where I am, I don't know, I'll never know, in the silence you don't know, you must go on, I can't go on. I'll go on. And that really ties in with that sort of infiniteness of just, it's interesting because I can't quite decide if it feels like he's saying like all fiction is pointless with this text, because there is something that is showcasing the ridiculousness of writing. Because like I said, characters here are writers and characters here are constructing narratives, and the narratives are all over the place and they jumble together. Alright, so I was just editing this video and I realized I completely forgot to talk about this part of the Molloy section that is simultaneously like the most tedious but also the funniest part, and the thing that I definitely will probably remember the most from this book. So I've never done this, but I just wanted to put this in the middle of the video so I could talk about it. I was reading this essay yesterday on Don DeLillo's Mao 2, which is a novel about a fictional writer that some people think is sort of a stand-in for a DeLillo type. And the essay had this quote from the fictional author in the book that I thought was really interesting. It was something like, Samuel Beckett is the last or the most important or something writer to really reshape how we think about the world. Like, reading him can actually change how we see things. I'm not saying Samuel Beckett has reshaped the way I've seen the world, but the first time when I was reading Molloy before class, just the Molloy section, I thought my first reading of it was like, this is removing chronic stress from a person. This sort of statement that I saw that first section is making is a requirement of being a member of the sort of society we've created is you have to be go, you have to be high stress, you have to be sort of mentally unhealthy in a lot of ways. And I don't think that reading really stands. I don't know, it's something I would love to look into more and see what people have written about something like that or whatever. But I do think the way that Molloy perceives the world is new. And the example I just wanted to bring up is there's this section where Molloy likes to suck on stones. So he keeps stones in his pocket and he puts them in his mouth. The way I took it was sort of self-soothing, and that's what confused this sort of stress theory I had going. And he mentions while narrating carrying stones, but there becomes a point where he's got, 2 pockets in his greatcoat, 2 pockets in his pants, and he has something like 16 stones, and he wants to suck each one for the same amount of time, and it becomes this absolutely ridiculous thing. I mean, it must be 3 or 4 straight pages. I didn't go back and find it because I don't want to look at it again. But it's so absurd that you have to read it, but you do have to read it because it gets so close to human consciousness. It's such an interesting experience. It sucks. I did not like reading that section because it just became so much math. And our professor had to make this diagram to help us understand what's actually happening because you really get so confused. He's basically talking about how to keep each stone in his mouth for the same amount of time and then cycle them through his pockets without mixing them up. And the whole thing is absolutely unnecessary, obviously, because, first of all, you don't need to put stones in your mouth. Second of all, if you do, it doesn't need to be for an equal amount of time, but he creates this sort of ridiculous problem, but it's also sort of commentary on fact, on scientific inquiry, on all these things. And I don't know, it was such an interesting section, and I can't believe I forgot to mention it because it's become this running joke. I have a friend who has a greatcoat, and every time we hang out, so we have to talk about, how many stones are in the greatcoat and Beckett and all this stuff. So it was probably the most painful part to get through, but it was definitely the most funny, and I just had to throw that out there. Back to regularly scheduled programming. Some people say he's sort of the beginning of postmodern avant-garde stuff. Certainly seems that way to me. I do think it's a lot more interesting than some of the stuff I've read. I've enjoyed Barth at points. I've enjoyed Barthelme, but it definitely feels like there's a lot more going on here. And the way that my professor put it was that, Beckett isn't just trying to get us to the end of the novel as a form, but is trying to get us to like the end of being, to the end of humans as beings. I have to sit with that a bit more, but it definitely feels like everything is being called into question in this work, and to do so in a way that is still entertaining, that is still funny a lot of times, is really impressive. So I would recommend this. It's not the longest thing ever, this first book. It's 160 pages, and it's supposed to be, which kind of scares me, the easiest out of the 3 books to read. It is a lot, so, if you can read it slow, if you can take your time with it, I think it'll be interesting. I do think that Beckett is someone who's like worth reading, in the sense that there are a lot of novels that are doing the same thing, and you read them and they're good, but what are they getting at? What Beckett is doing seems to be very, very unique. The only person who sort of resembles his weirdness that I've really read is honestly Jan Fosse. And Fosse, I think, is a little less weird. He has more like repetition about him, but place is easier to sort of fathom. I think I've become fascinated by form this semester in a way that I sort of subconsciously was before, in the sense that the way I was writing almost lines up with the stuff that I'm interested in now, but I don't think I had encountered it in text, and so I don't think I understood how to do the things that I wanted to do, or didn't understand what I was fascinated with. So this kind of stuff, not Beckett necessarily. I mean, it's super interesting, but it's not something I'm going to try to replicate in my own fiction. But other modernist texts have really been useful, and I do think I'm growing a greater appreciation for fiction that is hard, for fiction that is difficult but really trying to do things, and also finding ways to be entertaining, finding ways to represent what it's really like to move about the world, because as much as I love realist fiction, I do think it becomes a little there's too great a sense of clarity. That's just not how I feel. So yeah, more on this very soon. One of the books I'm about halfway through right now is N.W. by Zadie Smith, and that's doing some interesting stuff that I just haven't seen from any novel that's been published in the last 10 or so years. She's really working with perception, some interesting ways, and she also breaks apart sections in her novels and switches the writing when she does. And I think that's really interesting, when you can sort of see that, oh, this style is serving one purpose, this style is serving another, and I'm going to write differently in different parts of the book to reflect different states and different characters and things like that. So it's all very interesting. But yeah, I really would recommend this. I think there's a lot of great stuff. I was just talking so much about literary criticism in my last video. I think there's ways to sort of find readings that will help you get through this. And I know that's a lot, but it's probably something worth doing at some point to at least give Beckett a go. And I've never read Waiting for Godot, which I feel like is the thing everybody's read. So this was my first Beckett, but I'm going to find some ways to read him in the future, whether it be the trilogy or not. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll be back really soon. I know that I haven't been finishing books at the rate I'd like to. Part of it is some of the books I've read for other classes haven't been super interesting, and I don't have much to say about them. But I've been trying to put more essays on the Substack lately. I have some interviews coming up with some really cool authors. I have like 3 or 4 books that I'm almost done with that I'll be putting in a video soon. And thank you all for sticking with me. Thank you to everybody who watched the Conrad video recently. It was awesome to see the amount of engagement and people who commented, and I'm actually about to go respond to all those right now. It means the world that you guys are watching and enjoying it, and that people are getting something out of these videos. It's just awesome to me. And if people are interested in Conrad himself, I just ordered this portable Conrad, which contains a couple novels, a couple short stories, different things that I'll probably get into over winter break. And so more of him on the way as well. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you all have a great day, great week, weekend, whenever you're watching this. I hope it's warmer where you are than where I am. It's about 0 degrees outside and we just got a foot of snow. So yeah, hope you're not freezing to death like I am. Go Bears, and I'll talk to you guys soon.